Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the School of Self Worth. I'm your host, Nicole Song. This week, we are welcoming such a fun guest. This is Kisha Wynter, is speaking to us about her new book, Your Power Unleashed: How Savvy Women Use Courage to Get Promoted, Get Paid, and Find Fulfillment. She is speaking right to the heart of what I am also so passionate about. Kisha is a leadership consultant and executive coach, and I really loved hearing her perspective. Like, she knows so much about being deep in corporate America for so long and really working at these big companies in HR. She has a lot to share and so much wisdom for all of you to pick up from her. So I am really excited to have her on the show. And so before we get started, if you are a high achieving Asian American corporate leader who wants to permanently bust invisible cultural barriers and step into your full power, DM me power and let's chat. Okay, friends, let's dig into this amazing conversation. Kisha, thank you so much for being on the School of Self Worth. Welcome.
I am so excited to be here, Nicole. Thanks for having
Oh,
me.
I'm so excited. I've been reading your book and really loving so much of what I'm getting out of this. And, Keisha and I got connected through another person who's been a guest on here. And then, really, when I was reading your book and reading about you, I feel like, oh, you're such a perfect fit for what we do here, which is really talk a lot about self worth, especially for women in corporate and career. And I focus specifically, on Asian American women. But I know there's so much of what you work, like the work you've done and what you teach and share is so aligned with what we do. So I'm thrilled to have you with us.
Yes, and I'm excited to share. And I would love to hear like whatever I talk about that resonates or may be different for your audience. So
Yeah.
I view it as a great exchange.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I was like, oh, we're right on point. I love this. This is perfect. Well, can you just tell us first a little bit about yourself? Give us a little intro about who you are and what you do.
Yes, so my name is Kisha Wynter, and I am now a leadership consultant, executive coach, and in 2 days from now, I'll be a published author. So by the time this airs, I'll already be my first time published author. I know
Amazing.
you
That's so
have three
exciting.
books already. This is my first time. So just beginning the journey, which is super exciting
So
for
exciting.
me. I spent 20 years working in Fortune 20 companies in corporate in very many different forms of human resources, from organization talent development to compensation and benefits to HR business partner. So just a lot of different roles, mainly in financial services. And now as a leadership consultant, I touch all sectors. I live in Stamford, Connecticut, and so about 45 minutes north of New York City. And I am an immigrant. I've lived in the U.S. for the most of my life, but I'm originally from Jamaica, small island of Jamaica, and here I am on your podcast. So that's a little bit about me.
I love it. So awesome. I was actually just in New York, literally left Long Island on Friday. So this is,
Oh,
yeah, I know. I was in, I'm in Seattle, as you know. So it's a big journey across the country. So it's so fun to
yes,
connect this way.
yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, I have so many questions for you, but I really would love to start with the question I often ask guests here, which is around their self worth journey. And I'm curious for you, because you focus so much on, the experience of women, specifically in the workplace. And what would you say was your moment? Because, in a lot of the book, you're talking from a place of being someone who's higher up in HR, someone who's really supporting women to advocate for themselves more effectively, to, take ownership and power back into their own work. And where would you say that began for you?
Yeah. So I have a key moment, and I told a little bit about my story, having worked in corporate, got into senior leadership roles. And, you may look at my journey now and say, oh, she has her own company and she's coached leaders from over 50 countries globally and she has her own book coming out. But when I started in corporate, I never thought leadership was in the cards for me. Because when I looked on the top of organizations, the people that were at the top, they were not like me in many different ways. They didn't look like me. They didn't sound like me. They didn't have my personality. I consider myself more of an introvert naturally, an introverted type of person. Most people had parents that graduate from college. I'm the first one in my family. I'm also the oldest. And so when I looked at the difference between, myself and the people that I saw on the top, I didn't see any representation. And so I thought there was no space for me at the top. And that made me feel like, I wasn't worthy, I wasn't good enough, I didn't belong. And many times I was in the room and I was the only one that, had my background. And there was a specific moment that came. I was still in my 20s. And I had a senior executive come to me and he had a big team and I was his HR business partner. I was still fairly new to the organization and to the role. And so he came to me, he was like, you know what? I'm going to make some changes to my team. And I would love for you to come by my office and we're going to do a deep dive on my staff. And I want you to give me an assessment of each person. So I was absolutely shocked when he asked me. I don't know why. I was just like, it's my job. But anyway, I thought to myself, well, I'm way younger than you. What am I going to tell you that you don't already know? And so I walked into his office, my palm was sweating, my heart was racing, and I'm thinking to myself, he's going to listen to me for 5 minutes and just like probably kick me out of the office when he realizes that I really don't know what I'm talking about, right? And so, despite the feelings, despite how nervous I was, I pushed through because, that's just what we do. We know how to push through the feelings. And so I started, explaining my thoughts. And, to my surprise, not only was he keenly listening to what I was saying, but he was like intently and furiously taking notes. And I was thinking to myself, what are you writing down exactly? I'm not saying anything here that is that mind blowing, And I realized that, we often do this. We underestimate our own experience and our own brilliance while at the same time simultaneously putting that of others on a pedestal. And luckily, and this is not always the case, after that meeting, I heard him go out and say, well, Keisha said this. He gave me a lot of credit, but he was literally verbatim repeating to some of the senior leaders, his peers, and even the CEO of the organization, some of the things that I said. And it was that day just a light bulb that's kind of snapped off. I said to myself, well, not only am I good enough, not only do I belong at the table, but I am capable of influencing and leading it. And the other thing I then said to myself, you know, not only am I ready to talk to the boys club, but they could learn a thing or two from me, clearly. And so that was a moment when I said to myself, well, the real imposter is not, it's not really that feeling that I'm not good enough. The real imposter is that voice in my head that's telling me that I'm not good enough. And I've got to figure out how to turn, we'll talk about more about that today, how to turn that inner critic into more of an inner mentor or inner coach. And really to own my own inner brilliance. And when I saw myself really overcome that, I began to see how many people, I'll say everybody, like people of all backgrounds in the workplace do it, men, women, but my heart is always with the women. So I noticed it a lot in organizations, and I saw a lot of women shrinking from their brilliance and shrinking from their power and not stepping into, I call their, she's just your divine light, and letting it shine, right? And so as a result of that, I really developed this passion to begin to help other women in the corporate space really stand in their unique brilliance. So that's a
Mm.
little bit of my journey there.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think those pivotal moments, I love hearing the stories and that journey of like how do you start to realize it, recognize that you have this, like you said, divine light, inner power, and brilliance that you're not recognizing because it's not really about other people. And we tend to get hung up on what other people are thinking about us and whether they're approving of us rather than recognizing that we actually have to own that first. And I love that about your book because while there are systemic reasons, obviously, that people might not be recognizing you, why are you playing into that by not recognizing yourself? Like I always think that.
Exactly. And it's about agency, right? Like I don't want to, put the blame. There is systemic things in place, but there are times where we have no control over those things. And so I'm all about agency. I'm all about how do I learn to validate myself? If I'm not getting it externally, how do I nurture that self-confidence and, as you say, self-worth within myself? Because that's really where the power lies. If you can have that despite the external circumstances that you're in, that's just the first step to being unstoppable, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then you can get to a place where you begin to choose where you decide to work or be or live or whatever it is, because at the end of the day, we all have choices. So,
I am so with you on that. Well, one of the things I'm really interested in talking to you about, because you are an actual immigrant and, immigrant family, and so many of my Asian American women also have that. And I find there's some really interesting, unique blocks that come up for daughters of immigrants or people who have immigrated. And I'm curious if you could speak to that. And I think it comes out especially at work and the challenges that can come out of that. And I don't know your culture specifically, but I would say with Asian American culture, you're raised one way at home by your parents, and they're typically, making sure the family, the whole is in a really good spot. You're making sure that everybody is good. And then you live in America where it's totally like everybody's out for themselves. And so that challenge that can be really, really challenging for my women. Like they don't really quite know how to operate and they don't know how to own their brilliance. And what they do is they just work like crazy people. They work like insane hours and then they don't really get the recognition that they're looking for. And I'm curious how it played out for you and what you tend to see with women and, women of color, but, that experience of like growing up that way and then how it comes out when you're being asked to deal with a culture that doesn't necessarily feel normal or natural to you.
I think two big things. And I don't know if it's mainly my family or if it's Jamaican or what it is. But the first thing is just this value of being humble, right? Having this level of humility and putting your head down and getting the work done, because hard work is going to speak for itself. That's one of the things. That's the biggest thing, that I was raised. You have a hard work ethic. You execute. You deliver results, like you're going to get rewarded, you're going to get recognized. And, in corporate America, I can't speak about corporate anywhere else. That is not the case. If you don't know how to advocate for yourself and bring visibility to work that you do, and to just really just speak up, and show the value of your work, show your own value, then many times you'll get left behind. And that was really, 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 really hard for me to come to terms with, because every day I go home, like, you just work, everybody's going to recognize you. And I'm like, not really, because this guy over here, he's not even working half as hard, but he's going to go golfing with the boss and he's going to get a promotion just because the boss knows him. Right. So I think for me, that was one of the biggest things from just a value and a culture standpoint. And I had to really learn that there was a different way to operate in corporate. So that was the number one thing. And then the second thing, was more when I was a child. I When I moved, to the US, I mean, I came from a country where I was the majority. Everybody did look like me. This concept of minority, I was just like, I'm not a, I don't see myself that way. Like, as a matter of fact, in the globe, like, we are not the minority, right? And so I come here, and I would say I probably had even a little bit more confidence then, because it was nurtured. But then you go into the workplace, to my point earlier, whether it's conscious or unconscious, you look up and literally the lead is there's something about seeing leaders and seeing what's possible for you when you look at the top of the organization. And so for me, I just, in my head, I made up this story, and some of it was from things that I heard, not necessarily at work, but in society. It's like, oh well, you're a woman, you're a black woman, you're a woman of color. Like, how many like, the numbers are even stark, right? I think the numbers is 7% for all women of color in the C-suite at this point in time in leadership.
Mm, mhm.
So for me, I just said, okay, there's clearly a limit I cannot get to. And I had to unlearn a lot of the things that I learned, as a result of moving. So I think those are the two main things. It's just realizing what's possible and really actually beginning to remove those limiting beliefs around that. And then the second thing which is the first thing I talked about, was really about that value of hard work versus humility.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. One thing you said, it was kind of making me laugh when you were talking about it, because I was thinking about how for a lot of women, they're like, I'd rather just work harder and not have to learn to advocate for myself or speak up. And I'm also like, well, you know what? When you do that, you actually work less. Like you don't have to work as hard. And
Right?
like, who doesn't want that? So yeah,
So because the harder, and I'm not saying don't work hard, but
totally. Of course.
work smart, right?
Yeah.
Because what happens, and I used to, I see over and over and over again. And frankly, it happens to women of all backgrounds, if
Mhm.
you compare it to the men. And it's like, again, you're working hard. It was like, then they view you as the worker bee. And so then you just get more and more work to do from an execution standpoint. But you're not the one setting the strategy, you're not the one leading. So then, you kind of hit that ceiling of the type of work that you're given to. Oh, just give it to Keisha, give it to Nicole. They're just gonna get it done, but they're not the ones that are making the decision.
Right, and then you're not really the person who's shining,
Exactly.
right? And then not getting those leadership advancements, and I'd say for Asian American women, like, that number is even smaller than that 7%, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I
how
mean,
do you
the
start to shift it?
7% is like for all of us, all women of
Right,
color.
right, right, which is, like, crazy low.
What is it? I think it's like 2% for Asian
Yeah,
American women?
it's
Yeah.
2%. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's wild. Well, I'm curious because you also spoke about humility, which is something I experience a lot. And what is like, how did you then reconcile growing up needing to be humble and nice? And I think this is true for many women, right? Like that feeling of like, oh, be a good girl, be nice, be humble. And then how did you make the shift to feeling like can I be clear and confident and in my power, right? Obviously around who I am and advocating for myself at work.
Yeah, initially, I never really phrased it as power immediately.
Mhm,
So I just thought to myself, I'm like, okay, when I'm excited about like a movie or something, like in very practical terms, I am not shy about talking. I'm like, "Have you read this book? Like, have you seen this movie? Oh my god, it's so amazing." And there were things that I really was excited about the impact that I made and that I was doing. And so I tried to bring that level of energy and I reframed it in my mind. I didn't say I was bragging or sure. It's like I'm just sharing my excitement about the work. And who doesn't want to hear someone who's passionate about their work? And so that's kind of how I rephrased it to myself. It's just I'm just bringing awareness, I'm sharing, and usually people were pretty receptive with the energy because motives are really important too. If my motive was just like, well, I'm just gonna come and just let you know how great I am, right? Then people feel that and they're going to react to that. But if you're authentically excited and energetic, even when I was still in corporate and I created this program for women, because this is how it all started. It was called Own Your Power when I started it in corporate. And I'm like, okay, we have a problem, but I can fix this. And I shared it and I shared some of the coaching, the shifts that some of the clients, at the time with clients, some of the employees had. And you see how she showed up in her power in the office and we promoted her. That was like, let me tell you what I did. Right. And then people started making the connections between, oh, if there's this problem in the organization, Keisha is going to be the one that can solve it because now I'm bringing awareness. Now I'm no longer the best kept secret. I'm bringing awareness. And then the other thing I did, because again, for somebody who's more introverted, like doing it all the time realistically is exhausting. And so I would just talk to people that I knew had positions of power in the organization, and on one-on-one conversations like this, I would just meet with them, and I'm like, "This is what I'm working on," just like a natural conversation in meetings I would have with them. And so as I'm consistently educating them, then they also became the sponsors for me or the advocates for me when I was not in the room. And so that's
mhm,
the second thing that I did is ensure that I told enough people, especially the people that were um, in positions of power and were more talkative. And I leveraged them in a way to help them, to help myself get more visibility to rooms that I didn't get visibility to. So those were some of the things I did.
mhm. Yeah, you have so many great tips in the book for sure that I was like, oh, these are so useful for so many people. But you also mentioned something in your book that you were sort of alluding to now, which I think is really challenging for women is like, how do you get to be that person who is confident, advocating for yourself and visible, but you're trying to find that walk that fine line where you could start to be considered bitchy? And right, and how do you like, what would you say to women who are in that place? Because some of my women are new to it, but some of them have been doing this for a while, and then now they're starting to push into that territory where you might get that feedback sometimes. And how it's hard to be a woman in the workplace in general, right? But what would you say for that?
Yeah. And so I think are two things. It depends on the scenario that you are dealing with, right? I've had the situation, frankly, I've never forget like the passion, right? the passion can be interpreted sometime as aggression.
Mm.
And, I've had that happen to me. I'll never forget, I was in a meeting, and I'm sure if the person listens to this, they'll know I'm talking about them, but I was in a meeting, and I'm like saying, I'm saying this is what needs to happen in order to meet the budget, and all of that. And all of a sudden the leader says, well, because I was drinking spinach or kale drink, right? Smoothie. So he was just like, well, you're like the Incredible Hulk right now. I think you need to stop drinking that just 'cause you're getting really angry. And I'm like, I'm not angry. Like, I really am not. And so some of the strategies, like, in terms of communication, I would just like, all right, I know that this is not really me in this situation. It is that leader.
Mm.
But regardless of whose fault it is, it's impacting me and it's impacting my career. So, what am I going to do in order to be effective in terms of my communication style with him? And so, I would identify a value that was important to this person, and I would come from this place. So instead of saying we're not going to hit the budget, I'll say something like, I know it's really important for you for the team to look good in front of the CHRO, the Chief Human Resource Officer. And this is not necessarily going to be good news, but, and then I give the message,
Mm.
right? So it's not coming from, if we don't do this, this is what's going to happen. It's more about reframing it and saying, okay. And then he listened because it is important to him to look good in front of the CHRO. So I'm helping you win. So putting it in such a way that their brain is going to be receptive to what you're saying. And this, it just make you, it requires you to study people a little bit more and to understand what's important to them and then speak to that need.
It's so interesting because I feel like I'm on TikTok a lot, and it's interesting because I'm often talking about stuff like this, and people get upset because they're so used to it being like it's the other person's fault,
It
right?
is.
And
I
so
agree.
yes, yes, and, like, they can be saying things that are really not supportive, but then you don't have to take that on, right? Is also what you're saying because 'cause you're like, "Oh, okay, there's ways to shape this and frame this in your favor to still work something out." It's sort of an interesting thing because I know, like, you and I have both said, like, there's only so much you can do around the system, right? And then
Exactly.
people get so angry about it, and I'm like, "Is that really supporting you?" Like, what's gonna actually help you move your project forward or your case forward or whatever it is.
And you know what, Nicole? I don't think I necessarily said this in the book, but this is my own personal philosophy. It depends on what your goal is. I think there is a place, and there are times where I don't get it twisted or don't get it wrong. Like there are times I push and
Mm,
I challenge the system and I'm advocating and I'm like, no, this is, especially when I used to be in promotion meetings and we would, make decisions on promotions, and you were here like, oh, Harry or John is like a strong leader because he spoke up, and then this woman is aggressive because she had the same behavior. And I, as a leader, I was just like, okay, we just literally said the same thing for two different groups of people, but we have a different, like, this is the bias that's
mhm.
affecting. And sometimes they would disagree and sometimes they would. And I think there are scenarios to do that, but I can't, it's exhausting to fight that battle every single day. And at the end of the day, I said, if I choose to be, and at the time I no longer choose. I chose no longer to be in that environment. But at the time, I chose to be in that environment and I had to figure out how to adjust to ensure that I needed to influence, adjusting my communication style at the end of the day. And you know what? The reality is everybody has to do that. I'll never forget, I'll share this quick example. I had a leader who was a non-minority male, and he had a stereotypical type leadership style. And I'll never forget, they sent him on assignment to China to have a rotation, and he went there, and it was a disaster when he had that international assignment because he didn't adjust his communication style to the
Mm.
culture and to the environment that he was in. He was like basically a bulldog. And so, I give that example a lot of times, just like you've got to read the environment you're in, you've got to adjust your style to be more effective. And if you really think that it's not, you can't do anything about it in terms of adjusting yourself or influencing the organization to change, then your third option is to nominate to go somewhere else that's going to appreciate you for who you are. And sometimes I do think it's important to do that, but ultimately we all have to make a decision and make a choice. So
Mhm.
I'm
Well,
just
that's
practical.
no, I like that. I mean, I am a very practical person as well. And I feel the same way. It's like, well, you're choosing to be there right now. So you can either like fight that over and over again, or you could put your energy into the place of like, where do you want to be? Like, I want to accept this job because this is a good place for me right now and I need to be here. Or I'm going to choose to figure out what's next. So I used to be a journalist. And when I was in newspapers, I remember at the end, I was just miserable and I had a really hard time choosing it. And I remember that I got to that place where I was able to choose like, they're doing layoffs. These things are happening. I don't know what my next job is. I have to be here for a while until figure that out. And then once I could choose that and be at peace with the fact that like I had to work nights and weekends because that's part of being a reporter, I just was at peace with it. I was just like, oh yeah, this is my life and this is okay versus being like in this resistant, angry, push and shove with like my bosses all the time around it and being mad that I signed up for it instead of being like, no, actually I signed up for this. And so this is part of it until I figure out what else it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I did the same. And then the minute it didn't work anymore, I'm sure you chose to, and that's what I did. I
Yeah.
was just like, okay, this no longer works for me because it's literally raising my blood pressure, and I choose to no longer participate in the system. And then that's when I left.
Yeah, totally. Well, I love that. Well, I wanted to actually pivot to something that I really loved in your book because you talked about self-sabotage patterns, and I'm going to list them because there were more than I expected, and then they were also really interesting because there are ones I see in so many of my women and my clients as well. And this is like self-sabotage patterns, and so they're indecision, disorganization, overthinking, rigidity, playing small, and procrastination. I was like, wow, you just like listed everything, every problem I think that most of us go through every day. And so I was like,
Including me.
yeah. So I was like really interested in it, like in the patterns, and then just also like what using them. Maybe I'm curious if you like kind of have them be more like, oh, this is like a sign that you might actually be in a self sabotage pattern rather than I'm just a procrastinator. Like, let's take procrastination. Like, oh, I'm just procrastinating. Like, that's just who I am. That's just what I do all the time. How do you kind of frame it up if somebody is in procrastination to help them see what's really going on?
Yeah. I mean, I frankly, I ask myself these questions. I say to myself, okay, um, not doing this. It might take me 20 minutes to actually do the thing, but in my head, I'm thinking about it for 2 days.
For sure.
Right? So I ask myself or ask my clients, well, what am I afraid of? Like, what's the reason? Is there a reason? And if I can answer the question, I'm afraid of failing, I'm afraid of looking bad, I'm afraid of not doing the right thing, I'm afraid of making a mistake, then I know it's a sabotage mechanism because
Mm,
I'm trying to avoid an outcome. Versus I feel like many times we procrastinate, for example, as a coping strategy to stress.
yeah.
And the stress comes from the fear. So I don't believe in I am a procrastinator.
I don't either, but I know a lot of people who are
I,
listening who are procrastinators.
yeah, I mean, I even talk about identity in the book, how we take labels on, whether or not they're self-imposed labels or labels that other people impose on you. Because it's just the way that you've learned to operate in the world and you've learned to survive. And so, even for me, I'm like, all right, I always ask myself, like, this may not be an area of strength for me. Is it because I haven't put in enough repetitions to become good at it?
Mhm.
Or is it because it's just not something I'm interested in to do? You know what I mean? But I don't think that anybody's really born a procrastinator. So,
Well, I'm glad I picked procrastination because I can now think of the thing that I'm procrastinating on, which is also working on my next book. And it's interesting because what can come up for me, I'm like, okay, if I ask the question, what am I afraid of? I'm afraid of two things. I'm afraid of that my business will fail if I focus on the book. And then the other question is, or the other thing I'm afraid of is that the book will fail if I focus on the book. Like it won't get what I want it. I won't be able to write it into the thing that I want it to be or that I hear it to be. And so it's really interesting because like I have some friends. I was just in an event with other entrepreneurs, and one of them is a coach for writers. And she was giving me some strategies, and I was like, right, like I just need to put those into place. But it's interesting because then that also brings up fear of like, oh, if I put that strategy into place, then now I'm gonna have to do it, right?
Right.
Right, which brings me to this other question. I mean, I think we could talk about procrastination for a
All
long time,
day.
but, like,
Yes.
yeah, we could really talk all day about it. But I'm curious, so, like, say you're at this point, you're like me, you see it, you see what you're afraid of. But the hardest thing I think for most of us is, like, getting into action, which is what I'm talking about. Like, I have an action strategy from a friend who's a coach for this particular thing, for what to do next, but I also know from experience from myself and my clients, it's so hard sometimes to really move into that action, and you speak to it in the book, and, like, how do you think about it when you're really at that point where you need to move into action on something you're putting off?
Right. I think a few things. One, identify the story you're telling yourself about the thing, right? So you have the strategy, and sometimes just having the strategy, because we all know it's like eating less so that you lose weight, or moving more. Like, we all know the strategies, but there may be a belief system that you have in place, that's feeding into it, or, like, back to this whole identity thing. And so really thinking about, all right, so if I uh don't write this book, or if I spend all this time writing this book, then my business is going to fail. Why is that? Is that true? Actually, did your business fail when you wrote the other books? I don't know. What worked in the past? And so just identifying, the mindset shifts, like, actually, no, if I organize my time properly, and I put a reasonable amount of time on writing the books, maybe it's an hour a day, or 20 minutes a day, or 2 hours on the weekend, then is it really going to impact my business? And so once you kind of find something that helps you to shift it, and you may need to, like all of us do, work with a coach to help you shift it, then the next thing is have the accountability. But sometimes you have all the things, the mindset, and I've had that too. The mindset has shifted, everything is ready, and now you're just like, okay, just find somebody that you don't want to disappoint them.
Mm,
Because once you take that first step, it's easy to build momentum. It's like, um, I'm not really good in physics, but we in school we learn that object in motion stays in motion, and object at rest stays at rest. So if you're at rest and you're not doing it, procrastinating for a really, really long time, it's really hard to get started. And so
totally.
sometimes it's just like, get the community, get the accountability, just get started. Because once you get started, then you start getting momentum, and then
Mhm.
you'll move forward. But that initial start is going to be hard. And
I always
so
think about
push
that,
that.
like, so, yeah, I'm a big actual physical movement person, and I think sometimes people, like, struggle to get motivated, and I also do struggle with that, but I oftentimes think, I'm like, "Okay, Nicole, you don't have to think about how you're gonna feel at the end of the workout, you just have to think about putting your shoes on and leaving the
Yes.
house." And so when I put my shoes on and I leave the house and then I go to the gym, usually
Yes.
by the time I'm there, it's very hard to, like, get out of doing the whole thing I'm gonna do because 'cause I'm like, "Well, now I'm here, I'm gonna just do the workout," right? And so I think about it that way. It's like, what's that one thing that's gonna just help you swing in the direction you need to go? So I love that. You don't need to be good at physics to say that. I think that's beautiful.
Right.
I love it.
I was like, can I remember that quote? But even if you ever, I'm sure 101 people quote the book Atomic Habits. Like, James Clear
Mhm.
talks about it. Like, just the first 5 minutes, just do it. Put the sneakers on, go and get
Yeah.
started.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that. Well, this is so good. I feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I could ask you so many more questions, but I really just actually want to ask one that I think will be helpful for people to start to look at and to see, and really defining what power is, like standing in your power, because I feel like that's really the crux of everything you're teaching in the book and what you do. And how do you think about power for yourself?
Yeah. It goes back to the word agency. What is within your control? And I believe that everything in our life that we really want is in control, is within our control. And a lot of times we give our own power away, because we say, oh, this is not going to happen for me. And so for me, I know for a fact I would never be able to even advocate when I was in corporate for that woman that was being held back in the workplace to get ahead. I would never be able to advocate for her and give her visibility and give her power if I didn't own my own power first. And so I think a lot of us, and that frankly, that's how I motivate myself. I said to myself, you know what? Even if I can't do it for myself, I'm going to have to learn how to own my power, because there's family member, there's parents, there are children, there are people in my life that I love and I want to see succeed. But if I'm not walking in my own power and owning my own power, I can't share that power with anybody else. And so for me, it's about agency. I think you have to own it first. If you look at the book, the first segment of the book is called Own Your Power. And then the second part is unleashing it. Like you can't unleash your power if you don't own it first. And it's agency.
I think about all the women, if they hadn't owned their power, like, where would I be? Like, Connie
Yes.
Chung's been on her book tour, and I saw her recently, and I was like, "What if Connie Chung had never done that?" You know, in the '70s, like, fought those, like, really awful newsrooms where she was, like, the only woman, let alone woman of color, and, like, didn't do any of those things, like, most we wouldn't be where we are today, you know? Like, you need people to have made those choices for
Fun
us to be where we
fact.
are, right?
A fun fact, as a child in Jamaica, it's a whole other story. I wanted to be a news anchor,
Oh, you
and
did.
Connie Chung, sorry, was the person that was I was like, "I wanna be like Connie Chung when I grow up."
Totally. Who didn't I wanted to be like Connie Chung too. You're like, "Oh, Connie Chung's so cool." Yeah, and it's amazing, and she, like, didn't really think about it except that she was, like, so driven, and you talk about values in your book too, but she was just really driven by her values of, like, she wanted that job, and she talks about it a lot, like, she was just so driven by that job that she was gonna do anything it took, and she dealt with, like, oh my gosh, horrific stories, right? But she just was like, "I'm gonna do this at all costs," and she went for it, and it was, like, just her and Barbara Walters, and there was, like, no other women, and they just did it, you know, and it's just pretty amazing to hear her talk about it because I'm like, if more of us were more determined, you know, what could really happen in the world? Like, if we were really like, I'm in it, I'm going to be in my power no matter what. And I think that on those days too, where it's like, you know, in this world, in the life that you and I are in, like, you have to show up and showing up consistently, and it's not nearly as easy as it might look to people on the outside where we do it all the time, but it does take something to do it consistently. And
Mhm.
then I always do it too. I think about, like, my niece who's 5, and, like, I think about, you know, other women coming after me. It's like, well, if I keep doing it, it gives them permission to also do it for themselves too. So I hear you on that.
Making the world a better place, and you're paving a path for everyone else, and I
Mhm.
feel like it's a big part of our legacy. Look at Connie Chung. If it wasn't for
Yeah.
her,
Oh
we
my
wouldn't be
gosh.
motivated even to this day, so
Truly, truly. Well, such a fun, powerful, impactful conversation, Keisha. And it's now time for rapid fire questions. Are
yes,
you ready for
yes,
this?
I am
Okay.
ready for those.
Okay. So, first one is, what was the last thing you watched on television?
Oh my gosh, what's the name of that? It's on Netflix, and Nobody Wants This. Have you seen this?
No, I haven't seen it.
Nobody Wants This. It's with Adam Brody. If anybody used to watch the OC
Oh,
back in the day,
yes, I've heard about this show. I just haven't
and
seen it.
it's
Yeah.
a romantic comedy, and it is so funny and good. I
I
love
was
it.
reading stories like blowing up because I was a total OC fan back in the day for sure. And they're just like, he is so great in like
Yeah,
certain types of roles. Yeah.
it's like we all fell in love with Seth again from the OC. So yes,
That's so
no, it
cute.
was
Yeah.
great.
That's awesome.
It warms your heart. It's really good.
Oh, amazing. Awesome. Okay, great. Next question is, what's on your nightstand?
Ooh, so I quoted 3 books. One, I already said Atomic Habits. I'm always, like, going back to that book. I'm like, have to
Mm,
recreate my habits, recreate my habits. The second, obviously, is my book. I have it actually right in front of me, Your Power Unleashed, because 'cause I'm actually always doing the exercises. Chapter 5 is
mm,
about being bold, audacious, and courageous, and I'm always doing the exercises around building the habits around that. And then the third is more of a spiritual book, and it's called 100 Days of Believing Big. So,
fun. Yeah.
yeah, those are the 3 things I have.
I know I never asked specifically for book recommendations, although maybe that should be one of my rapid fire questions because I'm reading way more than I am on TV. Although I think TV is more illuminating because it's kind of like our fun stuff and then the books, but I'm always reading. So I love book recommendations. So that's awesome.
Book is good. Books are better than TV. I need to spend less time on TV and more. I do read a lot, but I'm like, I don't know if you remember when I was a kid, I would spend the whole weekend reading books because being an introvert, and I'm like, I can't do
Totally.
that anymore. I'm like, I can't.
Yeah, no, you just need a little accountability and motivation. I was doing a book challenge with my local library and I read so much. And then as soon as it was over, I've read like 2 books. So it's totally
That's a good
accountability.
idea. Join the
Yeah.
local
A
library.
little book challenge. Yeah. Okay. Next one. When was the last time you tried something new and what was it?
Well, besides writing a book.
I mean, writing a book totally counts. So you can put
What?
that in.
No, I already said that, so I won't change. Actually, I'm really all about taking care of my mind, my body, my spirit. I think I'm good on my mind, and I'm really getting good on my spirit and my body. I've been like 2020, I was actually really good because I was scared of getting the COVID and I never got it. 2020, 21, 22. But I've been like a little bit backsliding since I've started reading my book and getting older. Like there's a lot of long-term illnesses. So I started this new thing called it's a nutritarian way of eating, which is just really focused on getting a lot of micronutrients in your
Mm,
diet and just feeding yourself with whole food plant-based vegetables and fruits. And so it's great. I feel very energetic and it's new. I'm hoping there's like a whole community of people and they're really sticking to it. So I'm hoping I can do the same. So that's
yeah.
that's what I've tried that's new. Working
Sounds
on my health.
lovely. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Okay, last one. What are your top 3 most used emojis on your phone?
Oh, all right. So my favorite emoji is the stars. There's one that's the
Like the
little
3
stars.
stars?
Yeah, the
Mhm.
little three stars in one. And you heard me talk about a light all the time. I'm like, I like it, just makes you feel like you can shine. I always think of Rihanna's song Shine Bright Like a Diamond.
Yeah.
So that's one. The red heart is one of, well, I go between the red heart and the pink heart because I'm like, all right, I don't want people to think I'm like always love you, but I love red, so it's I'm a big heart person, so that's one of my favorite. And then the third emoji is it's the laughing emoji, but the when you're like rolling over, the head just kind of rolls over a
Mhm.
little, the hilarious.
Yeah,
And I just love those deep belly laughs.
totally.
And so that's why I have it. If I could get a deep belly laugh, then I will drop that emoji.
Amazing. I love that.
Joy.
Awesome. So fun. Well, Keisha, we're gonna definitely link your book in show notes, but what is the best way for people to find out more about you?
Yeah, the best way you can connect with me is on LinkedIn by my name. So Kishawy with a Ynter. All so that's my number one place you can reach me, and then I'm also on Instagram too, so you can follow me on Instagram.
Okay, amazing. And then just make sure you check out her book. We're gonna link it again below. Congratulations on putting it into the world. I know it's like birthing a big child.
It's
So good
like
job getting that
it's
done.
like birthing a baby. Your power unleashed. How savvy women use courage to get promoted, get paid, and find fulfillment. So you
Yeah,
can
make
get it
sure
on
to grab a
Amazon.
copy. Yeah, make
Yes.
sure to grab a copy out there in the world. And Keisha, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us on the School of Self Worth. I am so grateful.
I am so grateful. Thanks for having me.